Hello folks and welcome back. In this presentation, I'm going to be going over chapter 11 from my book. That's going to cover the strawman deception, trusts, reincarnation and consciousness traps. Okay, so I'm just going to skim over the important parts of this whole legalese, legal tricks and traps, strawman deception topic, as I have got a lot more in-depth detailed presentations that I've done on my YouTube, AG Middleditch, as well as at my website and inside my private course. Okay, but we're going to have a look at more of an esoteric lens as well, and blending in, some more of these facets that connect into the ET, metaterrestrial, to terrestrial agendas and technologies and philosophies behind these systems, okay, to prove the connection back into these invisible control structures, and otherwise just highlight the important points to go over it. It's kind of like a revision, okay, and then obviously, dive into a little bit of reincarnation and consciousness traps, which I have to elucidate. It's very important, obviously, when studying this subject and learning all the ins and outs of the legal tricks and traps, right? The economy, the money system, the banking, right? The legalese and everything else going on with the whole ends legis, birth certificate, straw man, that setup, which is our kind of token piece of the Monopoly board game, that it is all designed to siphon our energy. And so if you spend too much of your time in there diving around, swimming around and trying to find all the answers with this subject and trying to find remedies with these guys who are dishonorable at the very heart of who they are, given the mutations in their DNA, these Illuminati Leviathan races, the people in control, hoping that you will find some kind of, in terms of money, access to your SETI KV trust, this, that, and the other. You're just going to be flogging a dead horse and missing the point of embodying the knowledge that sets you free in regards to understanding who you are. Your sovereignty is always been with you. It's just been taken away through these two-dimensional paper contracts and procedures through ignorance and fear, right? Fear is the currency of control. And so in order to dispel that fear is to simply embody the knowledge and wisdom in order to put that into action, to at least safeguard your assets and your sweat equity, which for me, because I've walked the walk, I can now talk the talk and say 100% certainty that with everything that I've achieved, with what I share on my private course and on my YouTube, it has been an immense success for me to embody that frequency, knowing how to navigate these maritime bankrupt waters safely without them coming after my sweat equity, and otherwise knowing where I am, who the current rulers are of this system, and living within that kind of the means that I create and generate, knowing that my true richness and wealth comes from my knowledge of who I am, what I'm connected to, back through the stack of creation and where I'm going to end up, given my ascension back into the eternal life Christic reality domains once all is said and done during this end times invisible war conflict drama, right? So important not to get caught up and spend and waste so much of your energy trying to perfect this inside and out. In other words, take a step back, live well within your means, and just learn the basics, which is obviously the modus operandi and the motivation behind me putting my course together, in order for you folks to learn just the essentials of what you need to know in order to break free of these invisible chains on a two-dimensional paper realm procedures and contract level, okay, in order to free itself up to then move on to what's the most important during this time, is the esoteric spiritual knowledge and practices in order to activate your DNA and prepare your consciousness and even your body, some of us, to actually go through a Stargate and actually transition consciously and safely into that path of the hosts and these reality zones that are going to bring us back to where we all fell from before all this madness kicked in with this whole end times final conflict drama failsafe hosting out that is currently underway, and we're in the end of the end times. So pay attention, don't get caught in these consciousness traps. All right, so with that being said, let's dive straight into what I've written in my book that we're just going to cover to re-emphasize these key points with the strawman deception. So I write, this is an important subject to dissect, as it also reveals this invisible force that works through these governments that we have touched on, with Pierceback's amazing research showing how our governments and law are just extensions of the lords and angelic hosts in heaven, which is a catch-all phrase for the powers residing outside of Earth and in other dimensions, who steer the ship of state and acts like an invading army, stratos in Greek, which informs the etymology of institution, statute, status, and state. As Pierre exclaims, open quote, the earth is ruled by the principalities, a governing host, identified with the Elohim, the lofty ones. In invading authority, the Elohim and their host intervene globally in human affairs and assert their dominion over mankind. Close quote. I might add that the Anu Elohim and the fallen angelic factions, ET and Intruder races, are probably to blame for the anti-Christic invasive forces rather than the Elohim, as per the story of the Fallout, defined by the MCO and MCC teachings. But as we discovered in the Christos Founders races, I think it was chapter 6, with the genealogy of the kind of apparent seedings of the type of genetic types in our time matrix, we had that kind of Elohim aspect of that duplicitous relationship with those terms, with the Elohim kind of referring to the fallen aspect of that race line. And likewise with the Seraphim, you kind of got that Seraphim aspect again, kind of referencing the fallen aspect of those race lines, those collectives. So moreover, he claims, open quote, the legislative model stipulates the law of heaven imposed upon the earth. He emphasizes how the boat symbolism, as we will see, is evidence of this mooring of earth to heaven through the ship of state, which is politics, religion, which is boat, law, which is dock of law / maritime law, and economics, which is mercantile law / shipping. We have kingship, citizenship, government, with ment being the root word of mental, implying governing the mind, where government derives from the Latin gubernere, to steer or to pilot, and French governor, to steer, be at the helm of. We have inside governments, we have cabinets, okay, the same as cabins within ships. We have vassals, which are subordinate to a higher power, which shares similar phonetics and origins with their vessel. We have the nave inside a church, where people sit to worship their god, which shares its root in Latin with navis, meaning a ship, and is linked to the navy, which connects to the Latin word classis, which is a class, a division, army, or fleet, which goes into this classical tradition of the nobility, or Latin nobilis, meaning to know, which instructs a classified discourse of this hidden knowledge of extraterrestrial governance. As Pierre writes, open quote, Sir, noble, sea, as in look, see, watcher, and sea, as in the ocean, sailor. The noble is a watcher, an overseer of the ship of state. Idiosyncratic, the wordplays describe the watcher in situ to water. Definitions idiomatic of a blue blood embodied as an angel or noble is in lordship, end quote. As we saw with Kenneth Scott's research with the two-pillar Masonic system of the line of the king, which is the law of the land / state, and the line of the priest, which is the ecclesiastical law / religion, we get this church and state paradigm of governance that is otherwise reflected in the Roman Catholic tradition. Roman signifying the state, and Catholic the church. It is through the line of the king, which is the monarch, that the fallen angelic bloodlines are grafted / seeded, which gives them sovereign rulership over the government that makes them mediators between heaven and earth. As Pierre reports, open quote, in summary, the sanctuary of God is stylized in the Hellenistic and Semitic mysteries as a boat concordant in the aforementioned text with the chariot, and interlinks conceptually with the government, the ship of state, the kingdom of God. An earthly facsimile, the temple or vessel, mirrors a theoretical boat that is docked in heaven and at a literal level conforms to the notion of religion, which in Latin means religare, which means to tie up and bind back or moor a ship, an exposition of worship, end quote. Overseeing all of this, we have the Holy See, and obviously it's phonetically similar to sea as in an ocean, through the form of the priests who act as intercessors, as we have discussed back in, I think, chapter 2 that was, when demanding tithing, which is basically tax, in order for you to pay your way from the bar to the car, if you recollect, which is your earth body to the eternal spirit body. That instructs the whole root of the word bank, and this banking system, as we broke down earlier from Kenneth Scott's research, with Anu being the mediator and bridge, or rather his son, Jesus Christ, in the Bible, where he says you cannot get to the Father, i.e. heaven, except through me, who are ultimately responsible for holding legal title over the whole earth until such time Jesus Christ returns, as stipulated with the papal unum sanctums they passed from the 15th to the 17th centuries. A history we will now quickly elucidate on, which again will reveal more important information to consider when assessing this entity, Jesus Christ, and reflecting upon the three Christ story along with the God in the Bible, Yahweh/Jehovah, and their prophecy of wanting to allow thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, when establishing the supposed millennial kingdom and new heaven and new earth, which may be a prophecy woven into the split That's happening, but favoring the fallen angelic phantom path rather than true ascension. It can certainly be interpreted both ways. Okay, we know from the MCO AMCC teachings that the Catholic mob in Rome with the Vatican are linked to the Draconians, with the Protestants linked to the Anunnaki. They have, however, united in order to serve a common interest of neutralizing the Christic and Galilean races, and both agreed to come together to create the modern-day Bible and other religious texts to help control humanity. As we will see when looking at the moves from the Roman Catholic Church throughout the centuries, it seems like the Dracs, Anunnaki, United True Resistance are all jumping on this bandwagon to hold legal title to the whole Earth and all its beings and contents until such time JC returns. It is claimed from Iasha that the Dracs have always had majority control here on Earth, with the varying factions and Anunnaki still speculating for control here during this end times stellar activation cycle, who mostly rely on remote technologies, as we have seen with the Nebulan dyadic crystal grids and the Atlantean pollen implant network systems, etc. A brief look at this history shall paint the picture for us as to how the control and power has been established in modern times. Okay, but we have now the Fatali, which are meant to be the worst of these kind of fallen races that go into like proper demons, that are kind of used in the external infrastructure of both of these, or many of these sectors of these warring angelic races and their technologies. And so it's all spearheaded by these guys who are certainly working through, I think, all of them beneath them, as being the top of the top of the worst of the fallen matrices, okay, that are now going up against the Guardian Alliance, right? So they're certainly playing off in order to provide, order out of chaos and divide and conquer. They're kind of playing all sides in this drama of these friendly enemies who behind the scenes are all kind of controlled by the same force, it seems. So yeah, I won't go into the history, but otherwise we'll elucidate and show you how this kind of setup of the Holy Trinity of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit is found within the whole system of this whole birth registration process, which, as you can see here, in a nutshell, when I did the forensics on my birth certificate form and the registration processes, looking at the definitions of the words and terms and all the forms and stuff, and in the statutes, it basically translates to anyone who's registered and given a birth certificate means that you've been declared a stillborn who has died without a will and testate, imbued with a criminal charge, and made collateral for all of the debt. And as we know, the debt is created from an account of zero balance every time a bond is given by the government to the central bank, who has a banking license, who is able to basically change under the accounts payables liability a customer deposit or a loan contract into a fictitious customer deposit, which then extends the balance sheet and adds new money to the money supply. Thus, it is merely fairy dust. And you can see on the back of the birth certificate here, it's printed on security stock paper, which means that that has been made marketable. Okay, and so through this entity, which is linked to the stillborn or the stillbirth, which is the placenta, we have been made joinder and surety for this entity, which is dragged into the maritime admiralty jurisdiction, which is the commercial law of the seas, okay, which is operating now under bankruptcy, but otherwise disguised as statutory jurisdiction under the UCC, with every member state signed up to Unidroit. Just simply go to Unidroit, which is located in Rome near the Vatican. All of these countries are paying a copyright fee in order to base their statutory laws under this bankruptcy worldwide under international law, this UCC, but disguised as statutory jurisdiction within their court system. Okay, because everyone's in bankruptcy. Really easy to prove this. Jump on nationaldebtcalculator.com. If your government is in debt, they're operating under the same system with the international creditors. They are debtors. Okay, they are basically held under a hybrid chapter 7/chapter 11 bankruptcy. They've been restructured. Okay, and everything in bankruptcy has to be bonded, licensed, and insured. So here you can see within the kind of Protestant Bible pantheon of this kind of setup with what they've got, what I've learned through some of the gurus, with particularly Bill Turner. Kingdom of hell on earth, the kingdom of heaven on earth, okay, which is private. You're identifying yourself as the living son or daughter. You have captured your straw man under a security agreement. You've perfected that on a public platform such as a UCC or PPSR, and you've done other status correction papers in order to withdraw your consent, again, which is a big one. Lay your terms and conditions. The pen is far mightier than the sword, okay, in order to let them know, put them on notice, who you are, where your power lies, okay, and claim back your sovereignty that way, which is respected under silence acquiescence mostly, okay. And if you keep a paper trail, which is what I teach on the course, with setting up your own court of office under your own hand and seal, mastering the post-road mechanics, registering things yourself, you retain title and rights to that thing, you have all the power, right? And it'd be very difficult for them to pin you up against the cross, so to speak, which is what they get us to do if we identify ourselves to that straw man from cradle to grave. You'd be a lot freer, and yeah, they won't be able to penalise you unless you've actually done any harm to a living soul or their property, and you've got someone coming forth under penalties of perjury, under full commercial liability, with proof that you have done harm, right? Everything else is just commercial crap of charges and discharges going after this fiction under a colourable law system. Okay, so we're dealing with colourable title with this colourable money that was set up ever since they removed the gold, the substance that backed it. Okay, so yeah, very interesting. Like I said, I go into more depth in a lot of this with my YouTube presentations and inside my private course on my website. So just to re-emphasize the proof with breaking down this kind of trinity, as you can see in the IDs, you've got they always split the surname with your given name, identifying these two different parties. Then you have this kind of representation of this phantom aspect of this Holy Ghost version of yourself, which is linked to the straw man in all of these IDs, as you can see here with the labels. Okay, so yeah, it's proof is in the pudding. You can see it right there in black and white and in color, scanned in of my government issued IDs, because it's otherwise registered against my straw man entity, but they're otherwise telling me through the way they're structuring all these names and laying out the IDs that there are two separate entities here, which means that they're two separate accounts, and this goes into the foreign societies trust. Okay, and our ability to claim back that trust and the money that's in there, which I haven't been able to prove to do yet. I've come very close, but it seems to be you have to go to court when compiling and putting together all the evidence of doing the forensics on the forms to prove the fraud, come back to life with an affidavit, and otherwise force their hand then to start moving things and shifting things for you, so you can end up going from the public to the private realm. Okay, but it's all up to the individual to stand on their own 2 feet, learn the law, learn their rights, learn the system, and put together all the evidence in an affidavit and put in a statement of claim, and basically come up with all the cause of actions that you can then sue them for damages for lying, deceit, fraud, estate embezzlement, intent to deceive, misrepresentation, lack of full disclosure. The list can go on. All right, but that's up to each and every one of us in order to do that privately and take it with them upon their courts in order to say, hey, look, this is what you've done, this is what your definitions are saying, this is all the proof. There's nowhere to run or hide. Okay, so they're either going to snuff you out or they're going to listen, or they could possibly just chuck the papers out and there you go. You know what you're dealing with, thanks to understanding this hidden war that's going on with my research, the Tales of a Self-Initiate, and many others people's research now, Pierce Back, Yasha Ashiana Dean, right, the freedom teachings, that we must accept that fact that these guys, there's no honor amongst thieves, they're spineless, they see us at the end of the day as cannon fodder and units of labor and capital that they can use for their benefit. Okay, so just focus then on preserving what you have and what you're earning with your livelihoods, and transition into studying the spiritual teachings, activating your DNA and aligning yourself with that kind of Christic timeline spiral of ascension, organic eternal life, rather than the Metatronic transhumanist fall, right? So very important not to get stuck in that consciousness trap. So like I said before, it's all designed to siphon our energy. Okay, so let's go into a little bit of history here, which is kind of just going to highlight everything I've taught on my course, in other words, my other presentations on YouTube. So we can see it has been a strategic effort to slowly move the whole world under this system of debased colorable currency, which in turn required a debased colorable law system to now govern the kind of contracts and transactions that were occurring in commerce today with these debased units of fiat debt notes we call money under this bankruptcy. The title of things we acquire are only colorable titles that is derived from the legal title held by the international creditors, which is the Crown, as all property has been pledged as collateral for the debt. Such titles as deed of title to a house and registered keeper for cars, for instance, in the UK, and careful examination and looking up the definitions of these titles will reveal that you are a mere renter and user for the things you possess, and for that use you pay tax. Remember, possession is 9/10 of the law. What is the other tenth? It's title. Okay, and that's where the power lies. And as we saw prior to 1066, people held a allodial title to the land, and now we don't. Okay, it's all crown land with real in Spanish meaning royal, hence real estate. You've got Real Madrid, which means Royal Madrid. Real estate is just an industry buying and selling an equitable title to the royal estate. They are allowing us all to rent, and for that rent, we have to pay a fee in the form of taxes. So 1933 was when this system really started to spread its global wings, using America to manifest destiny under their Washington Consensus, under the auspices of a post-war peacetime treaty with institutions such as NATO, the UN, World Bank, and IMF, responsible to help rebuild the world after the war. House Joint Resolution 192 effectively declared the USA bankrupt to the Federal Reserve, which again, international creditors, goes back to the Crown, who had moved in strategically under the agents of the Crown in the previous decades, forcing such acts as the Federal Reserve Act through in 1913. The privatisation of the money supply for government use already happened in England back in 1694 when the Bank of England was founded. The HJR 192 recalled all gold and silver coin in circulation in the USA and declared the new Federal Reserve note as legal tender, backed by the full faith and credit of the people. Through the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, the countries who joined and agreed to peg their currency against the US dollar, which was in turn backed by the convertibility to gold by $35 per troy ounce. It wasn't until around the 1970s that France had recognised that the USA had been abusing this setup, as they were creating US dollars from nothing every time a new loan was issued in order to buy up most of the developing nations through the form of packaged loans that were designed to default some point later when they manipulated the interest rates. So they'd come in and demand their pound of flesh when that happens, and built NATO bases on their soil, claimed a portion of their natural resources, and inserted a CIA compliant operative in power, amongst other things. Reading Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins and The Secret Team, the CIA and its allies in control of the United States and the world by L. Fletcher Prouty, will reveal in detail some of the tactics used in this endeavour. So the USA were naughty because they were not pegging their dollar to the fixed gold reserves around the world, as they were printing more and more money through this credit creation process in order to fund their hegemony across the world. In 1971, the French started to send ships to New York to trade in their US dollars and pick up the gold held there in New York, so exchange their dollars for gold. As they were not part of NATO and were not held under the pressure of the cabal mafia that were running this whole operation, who could see what the USA were doing and no longer wanted to support this sleight of hand that was going on. The cabal couldn't have this happen with other nations catching on, so in 1971, President Nixon, as you can see here, announced that the convertibility of the US dollar to gold will no longer be in effect, thus defaulting on the Bretton Woods Agreement and establishing a fiat currency. The USA needed the demand for their dollars to maintain their power, so they struck a secret deal with Saudi Arabia by the CIA Special Operative and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger to ensure the Saudis would sell oil in US dollars for the next 50 years, thus making the US dollar the reserve currency of the world at birth from the petrodollar. This supposedly happened around July 1974, which brings us to June 2024, where, thus far, the Saudis have not openly renewed the deal as the BRICS are now on the rise with this shift in economic power now seemingly taking place. Another fun fact written about Richard A. Werner is that the whole cryptocurrency market, with Bitcoin especially, was created by the CIA in order to absorb the buying pressure on gold from the BRICS, who all started to unwind their positions in US Treasury bonds around this time and invest in gold. He claims that Satoshi Nakamoto is a cryptogram for Central Intelligence when deciphering the Japanese translation. The cryptocurrency market was set up to artificially suppress the gold price so those buying it, which are the BRICS nations, could not benefit from the rising prices. But as Werner predicts, the day of reckoning will come for the USA in this system as the debt just gets out of hand, which of course is all by design as they want to establish a central bank digital currency, which is CBDC, monobank type setup from the ashes of the current dying system. And as we have, debt is linked to sin, and sin is an ancient name for the moon and is also akin to the sine wave, which is time, which links into Old Man Chronos, which goes into chronology and the whole calendar system, which has its origin with the Old French calendar, which means a list and register, and from Latin the calendrium, which means an account book, and from calendae, which means the calends, the first day of the Roman month, when debts fell due and accounts were reckoned. Thus time is the measure of commerce and contracts. It is only through time that anything gets done through our life force, energy, in the form of labour. And just as with the concept of the pontiff and the bridge of Anu standing between us and our rightful eternal spiritual body and estate, we have the same kind of trolls who control the system to ensure only those worthy enough can unlock heaven on earth for themselves, but who are otherwise in the business of harvesting and controlling energy, which is the short side principle, if you recollect we went over, as depicted in the movie Jupiter Ascending, where the character played by Eddie Redmayne, Balaam Abrasax, says to Jupiter, which is the main character played by Mila Kunis, open quote, "Life is an act of consumption, Jupiter. To live is to consume, and the human beings on your planet are merely a resource waiting to be converted into capital, and this entire enterprise is just a small part in a vast and beautiful machine defined by evolution, designed for a single purpose, to create profit," end quote. So yeah, kind of beautifully encapsulates the fallen angelic mindset and how they've, due to them being cut away from the eternal flows of source, having to commodify everything. That includes even people's soul. So because everything's energy, everything's consciousness is energy, and that's what they have to rely on in order to sustain their fallen, imploding reality systems, as well as their own artificial immortality. I'm just going to note out of my book from the Freedom Teachings about gold, okay, which is also quite interesting, where Yasha stated in one of her lectures that money was created by the Nibirian Anunnakis, and it is linked to our atoms and monatomic gold. We never had to use money or barter because we simply manifested. Gold holds frequency, and in brackets you mentioned photosonic frequency, and scalar wave energy. Okay, gold being stashed on ley lines also, which is helping to run the reverse Metatronic codes at these sites. Okay, so a lot of this gold is actually all part of this kind of grid system of the ley line axonal systems, right? Where they've got all these like Fort Knox and other places where the central banks are, New York Central Bank, where they've got all these gold deposits, and they're using through monatomic gold and some occult means and processes transferring a lot of human life force, which obviously it used to be backed by our money, into it in order to help sustain their artificial immortality. And a few of the lectures as well, she mentions how they at birth used to do the put a gold bar on the chest of the baby, and that would do something with helping to transfer the soul essence through the heart chakra into that gold, and then later act as a conduit to help siphon again the contract that happens through the registration process, the birth certificate, your soul energy into the individuals who hold that gold, okay, on behalf of the Anunnaki. And if you recollect, back in September, I think it was September or October or November of 2022, I came into a little nudge from my higher self to look on the UCC for Jesus Christ, and that otherwise revealed the secret orders on a link down below where basically all the nations were its debtors, including the Vatican and King Charles, with the secured party being Jesus Christ, God, and the United Nations, as well as the Central Bank of New York. Then there was a little link there, and it was brought to an unlisted YouTube video, basically detailing orders to all the world leaders to send shipments of their gold reserves to the Bermuda Triangle. And if you recollect, that's where the Phoenix and Falcon wormholes are, which connect right into the Phantom Matrix Nibiru to these Anu Seraphim Anunnaki individuals, that we saw an actual order implemented from the ET ultra-terrestrial, metaterrestrial races down through the control structure here on Earth via a little filing and an unlisted YouTube video that would have been sent across these leaders in order to have that done, right? To literally put on Navy ships all of the gold reserves as they can, as much as they can, and then with the skeleton crew, with the helicopter on board, bring that into the Bermuda Triangle, where once it's there, leave the boat via helicopter, and God will take care of the rest, which means that the Anu Seraphim, these Anunnaki who need the gold, right, in order to help sustain their artificial immortality. So yeah, very interested. Me picking up on that, which again adds more credence and proof as to this stuff is actually really going on. So it seems most major industries are controlled by CEOs who are of the Jewish faith, okay, whose mystical texts are the Kabbalah, which is where I believe the term Kabbal originates from, with these Talmud/Kabbalah worshipping priests. Pierce back claims that the Talmud was founded by the Ptolemies and the Sadducees and the Theban priesthood, which translates to worshippers of the serpent, who later influenced the rise of Nasir, which are the Nazis. Above these guys, Peer believes there is a hidden matriarch who facilitate grafted bloodlines through coitus relations with the serpent, as he refers to him as the jinn, that only Eucharist or children are permitted to enter this very secretive order, and rituals that take place with non-human entities. We know from the MCO AMCC teachings and my investigations that the Kabbalah and Judaism is linked into Saturn, which plugs right into the black hole for all races, especially the fallen Jehovian Anu Elohim collective. To quote Pierre Sabak's writings in his book Holographic Culture on the Talmud, will reveal the type of mindset these fallen angelics and human Illuminati Leviathan raised puppets down here have and perpetuate, open quote. The author wants to make it clear that he is not anti-Semitic, a pacifist. He advocates peace and the right to practice religious freedom and intellectual expression without hindrance. The following quotations, as you can see on the slide, appertain to a secret Jewish or Western cabal that in no way reflects the majority of Jews, who themselves have often been victimized by this hidden priesthood and agenda. The quotes underneath are taken from the Talmud, which is the Hebrew instruction. The Talmud encompasses the body of Jewish civil and ceremonial law and legend, comprising of the Mishnah and the Gemara. It also includes Tosefta, which is the oral law. There are two versions of the Talmud. You've got the Babylonian Talmud, which dates from the 5th century AD, but includes earlier material, and the earlier Palestinian or Jerusalem Talmud. Highly secretive, it is difficult to obtain translations from these documents. Ideologically racist, the Talmud is closely linked to the Theban serpent priesthood and the development of ultra-nationalistic theology outlined in the following examples. Again, as we've gone over before, with the history, the snapshot ever since the third season as well, some like 800,000 years ago, that there's been these attempts of eugenics to completely eradicate on behalf of the Jehovah Anu Elohim any and all other race strains. That goes into even the Anunnaki and the Omicron Draconians, as well as the Indigo Christic Human Angelic Grail lines, right, and vice versa, with all these other factions also wanting to kind of wipe out all the other race strains. But it seems to be like predominantly favored with these Jehovah Anu Elohim, which is kind of like at the basis of why they wanted to do what they did in regards to defecting from the Emerald Covenant, so they can become their own creator gods and seed life that wasn't part of the Emerald Covenant in this time matrix for them to be gods over. Okay, so it does definitely tie into the Judaic religion, and unfortunately a lot of these individuals who are kind of plugged in, genetically speaking, to the fallen Templar Melchizedek, Anu Elohim, Jehovian, Yahweh-based, mutated, reversed black hole for ideologies. Okay, so as you can see here, translations of some of the laws out of the Talmud. You've got Tob Sheb Goyim Hadog, which means even the best of the Gentiles should be killed. You've got the Talmud Baba Meziel, which is 1146, which mentions the Goyim, Gentiles or cattle are not men, but beasts. All right, then you have this one below, you've got the Goy, Gentile or cattle, who pries into the Jewish law is worthy of death. In addition, Judaism's foundation is forged upon subterfuge, okay, an intrinsic idea built into the subtext of many of the biblical characters such as Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau, Moses and Aaron. The next section deals with duplicity and how it is a religious imperative to deceive a non-Jew. Again, examples are taken and quoted from the Talmud. All right, you've got this one is the possessions of the Goyim are like an ownerless desert, and everybody, a Jew who seizes it, has acquired it. Then you have Jews always have to try to deceive non-Jews. Non-Jewish property belongs to the Jew who uses it first. Every Jew is allowed to use lies and perjury to bring a non-Jew to ruin. Mystical Judaism practices blood and sexual rituals not disclosed to the public. Here are a few more translations taken from the Talmud. Okay, so we have, if a boy under the age of 9 perpetuated sodomy upon an adult, the adult is not liable for punishment, for the intercourse of a boy under 9 years of age is not legally an act of intercourse. Since the child is less than 9 years old, cannot commit sodomy, he can also not be the object of sodomy. Can you have, if a grown man has intercourse with a little girl less than 3 years old, all agree that it is not considered a significant sexual act. For having intercourse with a girl when she is less than 3 years old is like putting a finger in an eye. The eye is used to refer to the sexual organs on the anus. So we go into trust and reincarnation, which is really interesting, taken out of this book. So interestingly, Gwen Wyckoff in Passing the Buck Volume 1 shares her stories of working as a trustee for powerful elite families, private trusts, who she got to know, some of the beneficiaries she was dealing with, where one confessed to her knowing of their previous life and having control over the soul pattern reincarnation here on the planet, where whole trusts are established to preserve the wealth, not only for the family, but for yourself, when reincarnating back into the bloodline. As she writes in her book, open quote, as you can see there on the slide, many members of what the ordinary people may term the super rich, despite all their denials and carefully cultivated appearances of worldliness, are deeply involved with and schooled in the esoteric and the occult through magical, as distinguished from stage magic, means. Many members of the super rich believe that they can manipulate the system such that lifetime after lifetime they will reincarnate into the same powerful families where, thanks to the power of trusts, they will find themselves equipped with every conceivable advantage as they ceaselessly pursue the self-aggrandizement and relentless accumulation of power. The Bohemian Club and Skull and Bones are but two organizations that thrive on hidden mysteries. The esoteric point of view provides a belief in the continuation of the soul, thus through their initiations they believe they can control nothing less than the placement of it from one incarnation to the next. Perhaps what we should be doing is setting up our own next game plan. That is the true purpose of the irrevocable common law trust, not to leave the assets for the beneficiaries, but to leave them for yourself. When you come back, you want to be well positioned. End quote. In an interesting article she shared also in a book, which was the title of the chapter was Origins of Incarnation, a political and religious history, published by Chris Populi, he makes the following remarks, open quote, the believer in this teaching tends to be responsible for his own progress and salvation. Such a person has no need of priests and little regard for external dead letter observance, rite, or conformity. Jesus, who did not possess even a rock upon which to rest his head, never used temples, but chose nature to convey his teachings. The Vatican's lavishness, its sumptuous churches, and its ostentatious ceremonies are a reminder of the polytheistic dissipation of the Roman society. The Church's control over the masses was maintained through the fear of hell and eternal damnation. Such beliefs provided a tremendous source of income for the Church and the states. Through payments of penitence, tithes, celebration of masses, and fees for absolution and the deliverance of sinners, the Church maintained its increased control over the state and the people for 1200 years, starting in 607 AD until declaring the Pope infallible in 1870. In 1231 to 1820, the feared and ignoble Inquisition began, also called the Holy Calling. The Inquisition was established by the papacy to punish heretics, people who believe in an afterlife, in reincarnation, and in the occult, threatened the universal control of the Church. And also another major factor within the freedom teachings was to also go after, raid, and get rid of the human angelic bloodlines here on the planet. The papacy proclaimed such beliefs to be the work of the devil, witchery, and heresy. Those accused of heresy were sent to gloomy dungeons to be tortured into recanting or killed if unwilling to do so. Unfortunately, fears of prosecution and damnation became inculcated in the minds of most Westerners. Throughout the centuries, their deep subconscious mind became conditioned. If everyone could be saved by being reborn in another body, the Church would lose its main excuse to save a sinner from eternal hell and damnation. Priests would lose their prestige and the Church its source of income. Man is reborn into the physical world hundreds of times. Such a sequence of existences is called reincarnation. Jesus to Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews, said, truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. End quote. And I write, how interesting that through this lens of that passage in the Bible, when adding reincarnation, would place Earth and any physical reality / field and planet as the kingdom of God. Thus, to enjoy it is to literally be born again, albeit on a planet that won't blank slate you and subject you to vast manipulations. Okay, so the whole point of enjoying God's kingdom, which is there's many mansions because there's many 15-dimensional, 5-density holographic time matrices that we can choose to go and incarnate and take on a matter body form and live on an infinite amount of planets and systems and stars, etc. He continues, open quote, Spiritism teaches that on each reincarnation, man gradually acquires knowledge, wisdom, and responsibility, and importantly, DNA accretion. Okay, ever since the mutations happened, before what happened here on Earth with the history that's in Voyagers 2, Sequus and Mementi, we used to have longer lives and we were able to actually, through one lifetime, activate the necessary 12 substrand DNA template right in order for us to then go back up through the halls of Mementi stargates into Tara, which is Earth's density 5, density 2 counterpart, and ascend back into that portion of Tara that fell, okay, that created this solar system, right? And so now as a result of the mutations and the wars and the things that have happened and the seals put in our DNA, that had to then happen over multiple lifetimes through the necessity of death and reincarnation to accrete the necessary DNA frequencies to then one lifetime be able to make that transition. So he continues, his bodily shape is also perfected. Okay, he confronts his errors on the extra physical world and attempts to rectify them in the school of hard knocks of the physical world. He also consolidates his intellectual, moral, and spiritual achievements, as well as his good inclinations to the physical body. Unfortunately, sometimes his bad tendencies as well. Dennis in the Gospels, according to Spiritism by Kardec, explained that man never escapes the consequences of his faults because he is controlled by perfect and never failing laws. Such laws are known for millennia by Eastern religious schools as the laws of cause and effect and of karma. Jesus warned us, that which we sow, we shall reap. And again, if we recollect the kind of God source in the Emerald Covenant freedom teachings, does not play warden and does not judge. It's simply woven within the intelligent consciousness mathematics of every holographic time matrix of simple physics when it comes to cause and effect. But yeah, very interesting how even at like I said, human level, someone on the ground working as a trustee for some of these billionaires' trusts, right, speaking to the beneficiaries, all recall, or some of them at least recall, she confessed previous lives. And that's the whole modus operandi and motivation of wanting to keep a trust, because they know they'll be coming back in order to benefit from it. So we got in the book I write about consciousness traps. Okay, in reality, where deception is used continually as consciousness traps to enslave people's consciousness, it is important to comprehend the nature of consciousness traps. Becoming aware of what forces are stifling your force of will and taking away personal consent is your responsibility. It is critical to know that the stealing of personal will, the absolute death of your personal will, is the death of your consciousness. This is the most common consciousness trap on earth that's taken advantage of by the controllers. All right, so thanks for listening, folks. I'll see you over in the next chapter, which is the big one. That's going to go over what happened in 2020 with the bat out of hell, obviously the whole pandemic, the scandemic. Right, we're also going to touch on my out-of-body experiences, the shaman, galactivation, soul braid, walking experience, starseeds, indigos, FIMS, and karma. All right, so stay safe as always, stay sovereign, and I'll see you for the next one. Ciao for now.